tell we're in a group of teachers because when they get together, they talk. One of the things that I really enjoy about this day is that you actually do get together and talk. Because unfortunately, as educators, we know we often teach in silos in our little room. We feel like we're in an island. We go and shut the door and we have our students all day, and you don't get enough adult contact. I know the elementary, I remember doing some administrative work down at an elementary school and doing a faculty meeting, and it took a half hour to get you guys quiet just to do the faculty meeting because you got together, and one of the teachers says, but we get to use large words now. But I think it's important that teachers get together and be able to share what you do and find out that you do a lot of the same things, but you also share in the same struggles with the students that you have and have the same goal where you want the students to succeed. And I think it's amazing that we have our foundations that support this grant to allow you to be very creative in a very test-laden environment that you find yourself in at the moment. And being able to come up with very creative ways to allow those students to show you what they have learned and enjoy about your subject in history. And so, make sure I'm covering all the right things or I'll get in trouble. But as you know, this is our 13th year of the grant, and again, we thank the Webster Foundation and the Amundsen Foundation for supporting us. I would encourage you, after the event, to talk to Richard Webster, who is here to representing the Webster Foundation, and let him know what you've done in your classroom. He loves to hear those. I know he reads the report we put in and all the comments that you make, that we send, and enjoys those. And it's important for you to share what you do. We also have actually given over $2.5 million in the 13 years that we've been doing this grant, which just kind of blows my mind. And to see what you do with a small amount of money and how frugal you are with your money just brings, allows people to see that teachers really do a good job with limited resources and are very creative. And so, right now, I'm going to introduce you to the president of Azusa Pacific, John Wallace, and let him welcome you.
So 118 years ago, this university was founded. Consistent in that history of 118 years has been a cornerstone of preparing teachers. And I want to thank you for being a part of our history. I want to thank you for being here today and representing the number of students, classrooms, schools, and school districts you do. One of the unique aspects of APU, if you're an undergrad student, is we have a number of study away places where you can spend a semester and study cross-culturally in some of the most remarkable places in the world. One of my favorite is our campus in South Africa. We actually have two campuses there, but the Cape Town is a pretty cool place. In mid-July, the country of South Africa, because of a drought in southern Africa, is forecasting that they will actually turn off the tap. For the first time in history, a major city in the world will run out of water. And so there's been unique learning. There's been some pretty powerful steps taken, but that's down the road, right? I was thinking about those taps being turned off this morning, and I was thinking about you. Because really, the way this program is drafted and built is just the opposite. That there is a pipeline that goes directly to teachers, providing for you the kind of resource that makes a difference, really a life-giving resource to you and your students. And it is our hope and prayer that that tap doesn't get turned off, but that life-giving stream continues to reward teachers like yourself. So thank you for being here. Thank you for what you do with your students, and thank you for being a part of keeping history alive. I'm looking forward to this morning.
I'm Mark Stanton. I'm the provost or chief academic officer here at Azusa Pacific University. Two of my favorite vacations were the vacations where I took my family to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. How many of you have been there? Yeah. And if you went and you took especially one of the private tours where you have a guide who rides in your car, and with a little bit of work in advance, we were privileged on both of those trips to have people who had grown up in Gettysburg and had lived in the area for a long time. One was an older gentleman who had actually been at the dedication of one of the monuments, celebrating all that had happened there and some of the special occasions and the sacrifices made. But the impact that it made on my children in the sense of the spark that it lights to think about how history impacts our lives, what led to those events, and what has come out of those events. For me, that spark came in high school with my high school history teacher. And this was a history teacher who was so invested in the class and so invested in the students that his enthusiasm for the subject touched me. And that, with some Time Life books about the Civil War, opened up that horizon to me and caused me to do a lot of study and become very interested in history as part of my own orientation to education, and especially now to higher education. APU has been involved in this joint effort with our donors and through our library personnel to sponsor this event because we believe in what you're doing. Our School of Education, and many of you may have graduated from our School of Education or got your teaching credential there, is committed to educating students and bringing them up in a way that they will be able to go out and make a difference in the world. And for our teachers, as for all of you, it's so that you can go in and touch the lives of your students in the classroom. So my hope today is that the grants that are awarded will be part of that spark that lights a fire that opens up the minds and the thoughts of the students in your class. Thank you for being here with us today.
Welcome. You know, in an event like today, you get to hear from a lot of us before you get what you came for. But my name's Anita Hank, and I'm the Dean of the School of Education. And recently in the school, we've had T-shirts printed up that say, "Educators change the lives of individuals, families, and communities," and we believe that deeply. And so we're grateful for the work you do. But I also know in a room this size, there's probably a good number of you that are alumni of the School of Education. So could we see by show of hands if you attended APU's School of Education? Good. Thank you. Welcome back. I say welcome back. You may have taken classes here in Azusa or at one of our 5 regional campuses where we offer programs. And I've been given permission to give a really brief infomercial. As you leave today, you can stop by because we are continuing to provide quality credential and master's programs in teacher preparation, school counseling, school psychology, and educational leadership. A little later today, I'm going to leave and go over and work with our doctoral students. We're finishing our first cohort that have gone through a 3-year dissertation embedded credential, and it looks like all 9 of them will have finished their program and their dissertation in 3 years. And so we've got traditional faculty teaching with area superintendents in an EDD in educational leadership, and it's proved to be very rich for us. And so we thank you for those that have gone through our programs before, but for all of you, for the real difference you make in the lives of our communities, and never more than now. I have the opportunity to introduce one of you who won a grant this year, and so she'll be presenting in just a little bit. But Kelly Ersick teaches 7th grade at Camino Nuevo Academy in LAUSD. And as I talked with her ahead of time, while she's teaching 7th grade now, she's taught a lot of grades, including sometimes lapping ahead and having the same group of students 2 years in a row. So she now has 7th graders that she had as 3rd and 4th graders. She's receiving her 4th Keeping History Alive grant. She's passionate about deepening her students' understanding of history and engagement through very creative projects. And even as we talked about the ways she's learning to learn The content areas for 7th grade. I'm just really excited to hear her presentation. And so Kelly, it's nice to have you here today.
So like any good teacher, I come prepared too. So this is one of the creations from one of the projects that I have done with my Keeping History Alive grant. And so I'm just going to take a minute because it's very intimidating talking to adults. It's a whole different scene than talking to your kids. And like, come on, let's go. So bear with me. But so first I wanted to say thank you to Azusa Pacific University and to the Webster Foundation and the Amundsen Foundation for bringing us together this morning. Like they said, my name is Kelly Ursig, and I teach 7th grade humanities at Camino Nuevo Charter Academy. And about a month ago, I received an email to come speak to you today. And when I got the email, I was coming off of a plane from Thailand, and my first thought was, no way, I'm good, thank you. But I checked in with my students after I'd been gone for a while, and I told them that I had received this opportunity, and I asked them, like, should I do this? Like, do you really remember anything from history? Do you remember the projects? And totally thinking that I was gonna get, like, maps as an answer, because I am working with teenagers. And they floored me with the detail that they recalled their projects with. And they said, yeah, we did projects, and yeah, we did Viking Museum, and then went into great detail about that. And I knew from that moment that I had to say yes to this invitation. So here I am today, and then thinking about 7th grade in particular, knowing that I can't take them all on field trips. Our standards go from ancient China to the Silk Road to Mesoamerica, so I'm not having my Oprah moments and saying, you're going to China, and we're going to China, and we're all going to China. Like, I can't do that. So thankfully, I have grants, and so I have to think about how am I gonna bring those places to my students here. And so I do that through a lot of like art projects and hopefully finding success for every one of our students. And so I'm gonna try to be fancy and use the clicker. Hopefully this works. But I have some samples that I brought in from the various grants that I have from over the years. And I hope that you come on our journey through 7th grade standards and the projects that we've done. So this is my very first year. I worked on taking the kids to Europe, and so we were studying the Middle Ages. And in this one, there's a couple of them here, we were working on illuminated manuscripts. And so I don't have money for gold, so gold became gold puffy paint, which was awesome. And also some kids used gold Sharpies, and that became their illuminations. And so they first got to research online what they looked like. They kind of got an idea of the colors that were being used. And then they had to find sayings that they liked. So this student in particular was talking about Ohana means family, which was great. These were some of the finished products that were done in class, and you can see how all of them went like really with going into the intent, and then you'll see in a minute they got pretty fancy with some of them right there, which was really beautiful to see. And then, of course, we went to modern times, and so you have the illuminated manuscript of Messi, the soccer player. And every year I get Messi or Ronaldo, somebody soccer player has come up. So now we have modern day illuminated manuscripts. And then the next year, I received a grant again, and so they got to do illuminated manuscripts and this next project, and this was traveling to Mesoamerica for the Inca and the Mayans and the Aztecs. And so I started off by giving resources to the kids. So we looked at the collections from the Natural History Museum here. We looked at LACMA, and then I also let them look at the Met collections. And so at first I was just teaching them like how to get through an art museum's collection, and like you don't just search Google for things. So they had to learn that. And then once they found an artifact that they really connected to, they were given an amount of clay, and they had to sculpt that artifact. And then we set up our classroom like as a museum, and we had curators, and they had to make the tags and everything of the sort. So this is one student's work. This was an Aztec spice grinder table, and it was just really funny how perseverance was taught to this kid, because every time that they would come back, their table just kept drooping more and more and more, so they couldn't figure out how to get it going. And they finally was like, okay, I'm going to figure it out, and came up with this, so that was great. This is just a small bowl, and so some students were like, well, how do I get the two colors? And I'm like, there's colored clay, go get it. So they have that. This is a double-headed jaguar. This one's pretty popular. It gets done every single year since I've done this by at least 5 or 10 kids. This student found a Mayan calendar and sculpted that all in there. And at first, he was like, how do I sculpt this? And I'm like, go get tools. And then he just realized like a toothpick worked the best. So he would sit there on the floor and carve away with toothpicks. It was pretty cool. And then also, they were looking at the turquoise mask. And so this student finally created an Aztec turquoise mask. And so also with my grant, besides being able to get clay, I was able to get little mosaic tiles. And so they had to sculpt out a face there, and then they added the tile work to it. And they had all sorts of colors available to them, and this is what they did. This one they started to realize that it was really hard to display this. They couldn't figure out how to like get it to prop up, so the masks were just like laying on tables for our display. And that was, we took some of the books that I have in my classroom, and we took out all the bins, and our bookcases became our display cases. So everybody had to find a picture of their original artifact, and then they made the museum tag card, and we had curators take our whole K-8 campus through our Mesoamerican Museum. And then last year, I was ready to finally tackle ancient China. And so one of the standards incorporates paper making, and then the other ones talk about learning about Buddha and Confucius. So they got handmade paper. I'm thinking that we might do that this year, make your own paper. But last year I provided it to them, and then they practiced watercolor techniques and found their favorite Confucius and Buddha quotes and painted them on. There's another page of them. And then they also got to learn Chinese calligraphy as well, so God bless YouTube, because I have no idea how to do this myself. And so, you know, being the good teacher that I am, just a day before, I found a great YouTube video, and I was like, winner. They're like, how do we do this? I'm like, I don't know, let's watch a video. So it worked out great, and it was really funny because the lady that was in this YouTube video kept talking about like keeping your arm up, and so you would see these kids, like it was the best thing because my co-teacher was in the class with me at the time, and we were like, arms up, arms up. So they were like painting and like this and holding their hands. It was hilarious to watch, and they're like, this is not fun. But eventually they got better at it, and so I just laid out rows of paper, and they practiced basic brush strokes, and so there's some of them there. And then we got further into the video, and they got to practice some more. And eventually I found, you can see it way at the top of the screen there, some Chinese characters of like letters in particular, and so they eventually practiced writing out their names. And that's what they're doing there. And then from there, there's also a standard about tea making. So again, God bless YouTube. And they took us to tea leaf picking plantations, and then into the factory and like how they dried them and the old techniques. And then I was able to buy some oil Sharpies and some mugs, and they were able to write their names in Chinese characters onto their mugs. And then we started to taste tea. So again, YouTube, the master teacher that it is, they got to watch a formal tea ceremony, and they also took place with that as well. And so there are my students for the first time ever drinking oolong and jasmine tea and being able to smell the tea leaves for it. And then this kid loved it, and he gulped it back. And it was just really funny doing this because a lot of them were also learning manners on like, no, thank you, more please, you know, so it was cute to hear that as well. And then just as something extra, my partner teacher and I, this was not with grant money that we did, but like the power of projects, especially in history, is really great. And so we did a Viking museum as well. And I also paired with the math teacher at that time. And so she took proportions unit, and I was teaching Vikings, and the kids created Viking longships in proportion, as well as like tools and shields and other things. And so we ended our last year with, that was the Viking Museum in my room for Viking longships. And every group there has some sort of different longship created. The blue paper was to emulate blue water. And then the smartboard in the back, we had crashing ocean waves so that you could get the feeling of it. And we invited all of K-8 as well. So we had younger students learning about Viking longships as well. And this was by far the reason that they told me that I had to speak to you today. Viking museums! And that's the end of my presentation. So I hope I inspired you. And have fun with your students.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Doug Boyd. I'm a member of the Los Angeles County Board of Education. That was an amazing presentation, by the way. What a great example to show what a little money and great teaching, you put those together and magic happens. And this is an extraordinary accomplishment. Thank you, Webster Foundation and Amundsen Foundation. LACO is proud to sponsor, co-sponsor with APU History Day LA. APU goes above and beyond the call of duty in the area of keeping history alive and teaching it to the next generation and doing a great job of it. And we're very proud of Azusa Pacific University and their leadership and happy to partner with them. This morning I have the privilege of presenting a couple of outstanding third grade teachers, Mary Allen and Lauren Schauer, for their award. And if they would come forward, please, at this time. They both teach third grade. At Valley Charter Elementary School in the North Hills area of LAUSD. Both of them are receiving their 5th Keeping History Alive grant. And I'm familiar with this a little bit because my mom was a career second grade teacher and Dad taught business at Mount Sac. So teaching, I grew up with that from as long as I can remember, and so I really appreciate the techniques I've seen, and in past years I've seen at this conference. We really have great teachers in Los Angeles County, and you are the cream of the crop in history, and I'm just so proud of all of you, and especially of these two that I get to introduce them. Their passion is about helping kids learn through hands-on experiences that the kids come up with themselves. And they'll tell you a couple of those, and kids have great ideas. And so Lauren and Mary, please talk.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you so much to Azusa Pacific University, the entire Keeping History Alive department, and it's truly our honor to be here today. My name's Mary Allen.
And I'm Lauren Schauer, and we're the third grade teachers at Valley Charter Elementary School, which is in North Hills in the San Fernando Valley.
We're so lucky to get to work at a school like Valley Charter. We're a constructivist, project-based learning school. And as a school that creates all of our own curriculum, having grants like this is really what makes our teaching possible. We are a school that values process over product and truly authentic experiences.
And our school's relationship with KHA began in 2011 when one of our first grade teachers, Jen Mellion, told our whole staff about it and urged us all to apply for the grant. And since then, many of our staff have received numerous grants to help us fund our social studies projects at our school. We've had trips to Riley's Farm in 5th grade. The 4th graders have gone to the Santa Barbara Mission. We have a Laura Ingalls Wilder impersonator come to tell our kids about life long ago in 1st grade, and books, realia, and supplies have been purchased for 2nd graders to do their ancestry unit, and we've received grants every year since 2013 for our 3rd grade projects.
So as 3rd grade teachers, our curriculum is all about the history of Los Angeles. We have no textbooks, and we really have to dig up the history ourselves, and there's not a lot of information about how to teach this unique and rich history to young kids. So it's forced us to be creative and think outside the box, but we have great ideas, but then how do we make those possible? And that's where the Keeping History Alive grants are really instrumental to our program.
The project that we're going to talk to you guys about today was funded by KHA, and it's for our Growth of LA unit, and that's when we really study about 1860 to 1930 and all the different industries that brought millions of people to Los Angeles at that time. So the citrus industry and the film industry, the oil boom, tourism, were all things that entice people to come from all over to make our city what it is. And then we also discuss the resulting need for water once all those people came, and which led to our amazing and controversial aqueduct that has allowed our city to continue to grow.
So this history is a little tricky for third graders, so we try to make it more accessible by looking at and analyzing different primary sources, just like historians would. And then we shamelessly use catchy songs that we've used to create, that we've created to actually teach of them and help them remember the information about bigwigs like Helen Hunt Jackson and William Mulholland and D.W. Griffith and Phineas Banning and others who were really instrumental in building Los Angeles. We're not going to sing them to you now, but if you want to know them, we can do so later.
One and a two. So when we first started this project, before we came up with those songs, it was like 4 years ago. It was a total disaster. It was a lot of content to teach. But because of KHA, it has now evolved into one of our favorite projects. We're kind of like history geeks now because we had to do all the research ourselves, and then the kids get so excited and we want to know more as well. And so the grant actually pays for us to go to Sid Grauman's Egyptian Theater in Hollywood. And it's a historic theater that was built in 1922, and it was just recently restored.
But here's the thing, the Egyptian Theater doesn't do field trips. And in fact, they were not crazy about doing one for our school at all, and they very much did not care for 8- and 9-year-olds coming in. So we had called numerous theaters across LA that had once been Nickelodeons in the 1920s, and the Egyptian Theater was the only one to call us back. Nancy and I now have a very close relationship with one another, but we had to give them guidelines about what we wanted them to teach our kids, and then we had to promise that our children would behave and not have gum and not bring their snacks in and wipe their shoes before they walked on the new carpet after they restored it. But eventually we convinced them to take us on.
And this is going to be our 3rd year, and we're actually going on Monday, so we're very excited. Our students are going to be able to tour the theater. They're going to learn how the projectors work. It's not just pushing a button. There's film that needs to be threaded through. And they're even going to get to go into the projection room. And then very special, we get to have a private showing of a Charlie Chaplin silent film, Sitting in the Seats. That was a movie, from almost 100 years ago. The theater experts also kind of set up a PowerPoint for us to teach the kids what life was like in the 1920s for kids, and the students are super engaged and they behave really well and they learn so much, and they really get to feel what it was like to live and be and sit in a theater in the 1920s.
Each year our students take away more and more from the field trip, and since we believe that students, the ideas should come from them, we ask a variety of questions that leads them to want to make their own silent film. And to cultivate our unit, somehow they come up with this magically, and they create their own Nickelodeon theater. And so different years create different things, so we're excited to see what our students come up with this year, but we've had red carpets, we've had movie posters, we've had concessions, we've even had stars on the ground for our own Hollywood Walk of Fame. So we'll see what they decide to do this year, but we have a short clip. The whole thing is 9 minutes long, so we won't share that with you, but we have a short clip of our film that our students created last year. I was just going to add, off script. The students get to pick those were some of the primary sources that we had shown them, and they get to select them and decide which ones they want to incorporate into their part of the silent film.
At the beginning, when we first were doing it and we didn't have a place to go, but we asked around and we got gutsy, it turned out for the better, and it really worked. So we really encourage you to reach out to those places that you want your students to try and go to and see what you can make happen. You never know what you might be able to unlock for your students. Our school would not be where it is today without the generosity of this organization, and on behalf of our entire school, we thank you so much.
I get the privilege of introducing our keynote speaker. She's a friend of mine that I've worked with throughout the years in history projects, whether it's at UCLA and their history geography project years ago. I got to work with her at the Getty on Trajan's Forum, on their exhibit. And she's worked with numerous teachers throughout LA County. Dr. Podney teaches at Cal Poly Pomona in ancient Near East history, but she also works with the teaching credential candidates that are going to be teaching history. And so if you were lucky enough to have her, you really know how to teach ancient history. And I think you're going to enjoy just meeting her and hearing what she has to say. So let's welcome Dr. Podney.
Thank you so much for inviting me, and congratulations to all of you for receiving the Keeping History Alive grants. Congratulations also for making history come alive for your students. I'm sure, having heard just 3 examples or 2 examples from 2 schools, I would love to hear what all of you are doing. It must be just incredible. As Dave said, I've worked a lot with teachers over the years. Actually, for 30 years now, I've been working with teachers, and I find that I think I learn much more from the experience, I think, than the teachers do from hearing me talk about my field, which is ancient Mesopotamia. And I was working on this keynote speech, and I was thinking, what can I possibly say about history or teaching history that will be new or interesting? And I went through several drafts of this paper, and I decided to give you a talk about what I know, which is Mesopotamia. And so, bear with me. This hopefully will not be, those of you teaching 6th grade, you're going, yeah? The rest of you are like, oh, sorry, I'm not going to teach that. But hopefully what I will come up with will be useful for all of you in terms of especially thinking about the types of primary sources, the kinds of work we can do, looking beyond the standards, beyond the framework, for what can bring history alive, even with something as esoteric and strange as my field. It's actually really interesting. Anyway, I have a PowerPoint, and I hope you can see it. There are buttons here, and I hope I press the right one. Let's see if we get it. There we go. Okay. And then going on to the next one. So I want to go beyond the big names of history and to give you a case study of how one can investigate history. So here on the slide you see is, and I should have used a bigger font. Sorry, I apologize. Bad teaching. But these are 2 standards from the 6th grade history standards about what is expected of students in 6th grade. 6.2.3, understand the relationship between religion and the political and social order in Mesopotamia and Egypt. And 6.2.4, know the significance of Hammurabi's code. Now, I have to tell you, I don't think I've achieved these standards, and I've been in my field for 30 years. So, seriously. But we can do something with these. I also want to mention that the new framework is really helpful. So the new framework has added to this, and just briefly to tell you what's in the new framework, it adds to this, and it says the cuneiform writing system, mentioning the writing system used in Mesopotamia, was essential to the functioning of the legal system and the administrative structure of Mesopotamian kingdoms. The signs were written on clay tablets and could be used to represent phonetically many ancient languages, including Sumerian and Akkadian, the languages of Mesopotamia. Mesopotamians had a complex legal system and written laws, of which Hammurabi's are the best preserved, though not the earliest. That's fantastic. The framework has really kind of expanded on what you have in these 2 standards, and I think, having looked through the new framework, there's a lot of instances like that, where there's a lot of real help. So, Mesopotamia and Egypt. I am not going to talk about Egypt. It's not my field. I don't read hieroglyphs. I love Egypt, but leaving it out today. So I'm going to focus on ancient Mesopotamia, and on the map that you see, it's the region that is currently Iraq, the region that is marked as Babylonia and Assyria. And there's a little dot on that map that you probably can't see of Babylon right in the middle, and that was the capital city of Hammurabi, who ruled from 1792 to 1750 BCE. And we know a lot about him. Beyond his laws, there's a lot of information. But let's start with the laws and with his stele on which the laws were written. He had this set up in the middle of a city, in fact, in several cities in his kingdom. And at the very top of it is this image that you see here. And this shows Hammurabi and the god Shamash. And very often, when I ask my students, what do you think's going on here, they assume that it's Hammurabi who's sitting down and the god who's standing in front of him. But no, no, no. It's the god who's sitting down, and it's Hammurabi who's the standing figure. And there's a lot going on in this image. We see the god is seated, and he's got his hand extended. We also can see that he's got some kind of fluffy things coming out of his shoulders. Well, those are the rays of the sun, which tells us this is the sun god. And in Mesopotamia, the sun god was the god of justice. He was the god who watched over the legal system, with obvious reason, because the sun can see everything. And in a polytheistic society where there are many gods, the sun god is often a very, very significant god, and he was to the Mesopotamians. And so he's watching over justice. This is on top of the code of law, and Hammurabi is standing in front of him. His hands are in prayer. That was the pose that they did to pray in Mesopotamia. And so we see Hammurabi praying, and an interesting thing about this is the sun god has in his hand, extending forward, a rod and a ring. Now those were the symbols of kingship. It's almost like he's handing him a crown, if we were thinking of this in sort of medieval terms. And so what I have my students think about is what's going on here. Well, what Hammurabi is saying is that he is a pious king, and that he's been given the right to rule by the god of justice, by the god Shamash. And most of the population would have been illiterate, but they would have seen this in the middle of their town square, and they would have understood what Hammurabi was saying. But there's a lot more information, as I say. And one of the ways that we know that Hammurabi's laws were significant in his own time, not just to us today, is because copies of them were found in many, many different places around Mesopotamia, including on clay tablets like this. So scribes would copy the laws, they would study them, they would learn them as part of their legal training. So even though Hammurabi's laws weren't the first, that's not why they're significant, they were significant because they had such an impact over time on the communities in Mesopotamia, and ultimately all the way to the present day. Because once laws were invented, they were never forgotten, and Hammurabi's laws were considered in ancient times to be the model of good laws. So I want to show you a little bit about what we can do with these laws. So here in my next slide, I have I hope. There. I have 3 laws that were, did I miss one? I missed one. Hold on. Okay, this is what I missed. So this is what we do as, what's called an Assyriologist. It means I read cuneiform. And so this is my process of understanding the laws of Hammurabi. At the top of the slide here is the cuneiform version. You read from left to right. Of law number 14. Obviously, the number 14 is not on the original. That's been added. But below it is how it is transliterated into, each sign is turned into the sound which we read. Underneath that is the version that is actually in the Akkadian language. So it says, Shuma awilim, mar awilim sichram, ishtarak idak. That's what it says in Akkadian. And when we translate that into English, it says, if a man should kidnap the young child of another man, he shall be killed. Okay, so what I want to do today is to look at some of these laws, and particularly laws that pertain to families and to children and parents. This goes back to that first standard that I mentioned, how religion has an impact on the social order and how politics and the social order were all intertwined. So we see Hammurabi, this image of him at the top of his stele, receiving the right to be king from the gods. That was a standard Mesopotamian understanding. They believed that the kings had their legitimacy from the gods. But we also see the king then trying to create social order through his promulgation of laws. So there are so many laws about children and parents, but I've just picked out 3 of them here. The first one that you see here says, if a man takes in adoption a young child and then rears him, that child will not be reclaimed by his birth parents. Well, adoption was very common in Mesopotamia. It was essential in their culture to have children. You needed to have children in order to continue your family trade, in order to run your family farm, and even after you died, you needed children to provide offerings at your tomb. So if a couple couldn't have children, they would adopt, and this became very common. Where did they adopt the children from? Largely, they adopted them from families that were too large, where parents had so many children that they couldn't support the family. And so they would give children up for adoption with the hope that the child would have a better future than they would have in their birth family. And so we see the second law, law number 188, here, which says if a craftsman takes a young child to rear and then teaches him his craft, that child will not be reclaimed. So you can see adoption has a really different sort of component than it has in our culture, in that the biological parents were hoping that the child, expecting that the child would be taught a trade, the son would be taught a trade when he was given up for adoption. But then we see 189, it says, if he, that's the adoptive father, should not teach him his craft, that child shall return to his biological father's house. So the idea is that this is a contract between the two families, and therefore the adopting family had to train the child in a way that would give him a living for the rest of his life. We have more information about adoptions from contracts that survive that reflect the clauses that took place when a child was adopted. And this is an example of an adoption contract. The Mesopotamians had contracts for everything. They were terribly litigious. They really cared about getting everything in writing. You had to have a prenup in Mesopotamia. In our culture, it's completely, we don't care if we have one or not. Well, most people, choose to have a prenup for a particular reason. They had to have a prenup. You had a contract, and it laid out exactly who got what, how the father's wealth went to the children, and the mother, who had her separate property. It wasn't joint property. That went to the children. What happened if they divorced? What happened if one died? What happened if the father remarried? It's all in these marriage contracts. And they would also have adoption contracts. And so this adoption contract, it's very long, and I won't read you the whole thing. But what it says is, giving you a summary, that a boy has been adopted by his new parents, and it says he shall rejoice in their joys and commiserate in their miseries. But, isn't it sweet? I like that. But should his father or his mother say to them, "You are not our son," they shall forfeit their house and belongings. They cannot just throw him out. If they throw him out, he gets the house and belongings. So this is a serious contract. On the other hand, if he should say to his mother, "You are not my mother," or say to his father, "You are not my father," they shall have him shaved and shall sell him for money. So, tell your kids they have it good. He can't go against his parents. Anyway, the other point of this is that he becomes the primary heir. And it says in the contract that if they have children of their own, if they have biological children or they adopt children of their own, then that means that his place cannot be changed. He is always going to be the eldest son, and he gets the double share of an inheritance. And the other children will then split the rest of the inheritance between them. And then it says, whichever among the brothers shall contest this. So if one of his brothers says, no, you don't have a right to that, it says he will be deemed to have eaten the taboo of, and it lists a bunch of gods, Shamash, Ishtomer, and so forth, and he shall pay 1/3 minas of silver, the penalty in a capital case, and then it lists the witnesses. So this is really binding, right? He can't get out of it. And you can see that there's a lot of protection for adopted children and a lot of protection for the family here. This eating the taboo of the gods, though, is really interesting. What it means is that they swore an oath that they would follow this contract. And the boy must have been old enough to swear the oath, because it says he's done so. Oaths were really important. And now we get back to that tie between religion and social order. Because what happened if, indeed, having sworn an oath to these gods, there's god Shamash coming up through the mountains, there's the goddess Ishtar here, the god Ea, who is the god of fresh water. What if you'd sworn an oath to these gods and then you went against it? So at that point, you would go to court. And we have court records from Mesopotamia as well. And all of these, I should tell you, these are accessible to you. The internet is a wonderful thing. If you're searching for primary sources, there are so many. And they don't look like this. You don't have to read them in cuneiform. They are translated into English. And they tell us so much. So there are court records. And supposing that boy, one of the brothers, went to court and said, actually, I am the oldest brother and I deserve the double share. It's not the boy who's listed, whose name is Yahatiel. Well, they would go to court and they would bring with them the contract. The boy who got the double share would bring his contract, and he would bring those witnesses who were listed on the contract. They would all go to court together. And there would be a panel of judges. There were normally 7 judges. And the judges would determine the decision. They didn't have juries yet, but they had 7 judges, kind of like our Supreme Court, so that they would have it had to be a majority. At that point, they would bring the witnesses in, and they would make the witnesses swear an oath. Did you or did you not see this contract drawn up? Does this boy deserve his double share? Now, they would not swear a false oath. This was just absolute in Mesopotamia. You did not swear false oaths. Because they believed so powerfully in these gods that they thought if you said, by Shamash, I saw this happen, and you weren't telling the truth, you'd be killed on the spot. You know, just boom, dead. Or if you didn't die right then, something really bad would happen to you. It wasn't ever worth it. And so they didn't swear false oaths. If you could get witnesses to say, we saw this, case closed, done, the trial was over. And that was the case. So you would have, in these court records, they would say either they swore an oath or they backed away and would not swear the oath, which means, they weren't telling the truth, and once put in front of the gods, they weren't going to do it. So we can see then that the gods were very important in Mesopotamia. We also see this in many ways. For example, here's a cylinder seal, and I understand, I am so excited, there's a whole collection of cylinder seals here at the university of this kind. They're absolutely tiny, they're about 1 inch tall, and they were rolled on clay. And here you can see in this cylinder seal a similar scene to the one at the top of the Stele of Hammurabi, with a king on the left and the god sitting on the right, and a goddess in between them introducing the king to the god. This seal was given to a high official, and it's a reminder again of how crucial the gods were in all aspects of their society. We've seen in the legal system, we've seen in family law, but we also see it here, even in what they used as a signature, which was a cylinder seal. Finally, my last primary source here is a letter, and this doesn't have anything to do with the legal system, but it has to do with a boy's relationship with his mother. But right at the beginning, it says, and it's just, he's living away from home, he's probably a teenager, a similar letter is shown here. He writes, "Tell the lady Zenu," who's his mother, "Idinsin, her son, sends the following message. May the gods keep you forever in good health for my sake." So again, the gods everywhere, the gods absolutely ubiquitous in this society. He's asking the gods to take care of his mom. Then he goes on to complain rather vociferously about how she's not sending him nice clothes. And he really needs better clothes because he looks worse than his friend, whose father is less prestigious than his father. And he ends it with, "In spite of the fact that you bore me, and his mother only adopted him, his mother loves him, and while you do not love me." So here it is, 3,700 years ago, and they've pretty been saying, manipulating their parents with guilt ever since. But, so anyway, we come back, though, to Hammurabi's laws. And at the epilogue of the laws, we can see what Hammurabi was trying to achieve by writing these. And he says here in the epilogue, "Let any wronged man who has a lawsuit come before the statue of me, the King of Justice, and let them have my inscribed stele read aloud to him. Thus may he hear my precious pronouncements, and let my stele reveal the lawsuit for him. May he examine his case, may he calm his troubled heart, and may he praise me." So right there he's saying, I'm putting these laws out so people know if they have a case, if they can go to court, if they have a right to go to court. But then he says about praising himself, he says at the end, this praise saying, "Hammurabi, the Lord, who is like a father and begetter to his people, submitted himself to the command of the god Marduk. his lord, and achieved victory for his god Marduk everywhere. So Hammurabi's claiming again that the glory of his reign should go to Marduk, the god of Babylon. And again, as we saw in that standard 6.2.3, religion and politics are intimately bound together in this society. So, to sum up, we've taken a brief tour then of a few primary sources. We've looked at a few laws, a contract, a court case, and a letter. We found plenty of evidence to support the standards that you see in the 6th grade curriculum, but we've also been doing historical investigation, piecing this evidence together, coming to an understanding of just a little part of a world that flourished 3,700 years ago, and learning about how families interacted and what was expected. This is what historians do all the time, and it's what makes history so fascinating. We see that the people living in the past had their own passions. They cared deeply about the world in which they lived. Keeping history alive is what we all do when we teach, and I congratulate all of you on your achievements in the classroom. Thank you.
How many of you want to take a class from her now to learn more about? Now I get to tell you a little bit about our grant and what you guys have been doing. But first, I'd like to actually ask, who is a first-time recipient of a grant? No, you have to stand. How many of you are second-time recipients? How many of you are more than two? How many of you here are just supporting somebody that came for a grant? It's important. You know, having been a history teacher in middle school, I know a lot of the things that you go through. How many of you actually plan family vacations around historic sites? Your kids either will grow up to be a history teacher or they'll hate history altogether. It's just, you know, and your spouse probably, you know, we don't have room in the car for that. Quit buying things, because you're buying things to bring back into the classroom. I went with a group of teachers to Japan to teach for a summer, and I had many of them collecting things to bring back to teach in their unit in Japan, and only to get to the airport and find out there was a weight limit. But we know that you teachers do a lot to bring history and students' imaginations alive. But with our grant, you know, again, most of you know Angie or Lindsay or one of our student workers that you talk to all the time or email about our grant, but it takes a lot of people to put these things together. It's just not, you know, myself, but we have a slew of student workers and staff that help, and I'd like them to stand. I won't take the time to try to name everybody, but if you give them a thank you for all the work that they do. All their work allows me to do my job, and I appreciate that quite a bit. So, some of the numbers. As you saw on some of the slides, we have 598 teachers that have been impacted this year by the grant. We have 19,000 students, almost 20,000 students in LA County are being impacted by the grants that you have written and have the students taking part in. It's amazing, you know, Dr. Andrews, who started this grant 13 years ago, was always impressed with the amount of money it took to actually reach the students in the classroom. So in his figuring, he would tell you how much a teacher would cost for the grant, for the amount of money that we've given out. It was $474 per teacher to be able to impact that many students. So a little bit of money goes a very long way. And for each student, the grant money, it only costs $14 per student to make the impact that you are having. And that is just amazing. If the government could figure out how to run things that way, we'd be really, you know, in a better shape. So, how many of your elementary classrooms? We had 120 of you this year. So, all right, elementary. Little people. So I didn't teach elementary. I didn't fit in the furniture. Middle school, we had 36 of you brave people. But I have to, defend middle school, having taught it. They still love to color. They still love to do artwork, and they think they know everything. So it's a fun group. And then high school, we have 18 high school teachers this year. So field trips. We had 97 field trips, and I still think we actually fund Riley's farm. I tell Devin that every year when I talk to him. So if you had a field trip, can you raise your hand? All right. Classroom resources, we had 37 grants just for classroom resources, books, which makes, my heart go, and our library. 20 grants for on-campus presentations. Now, if you don't know what an on-campus presentation is, it's a field trip that comes to you. So if you really want to find out more about that, talk to one of these teachers that did an on-campus presentation. And we had 4 go to conferences this year for professional development. Do we have, who are our professional development? Okay. And that's important too, as you all know, being able to go and talk to other teachers, find new avenues of sources to bring into the classroom. We had many technology advancements in the classroom, but we also had, as you saw, simple artwork in the classroom. And that's what I loved about teaching history in middle schools, because we can bring art into the classroom. Because unfortunately, art programs in the middle school have pretty much gone away in many of the school districts. And so you become the history teacher, the art teacher, the drama teacher. I mean, middle school's drama anyway. I say that because I have a 13-year-old, and so drama is everything in our household at the moment. That and books. But we also have the on-campus presentations, and I like those. I used to do those as well as a teacher, because it's not only impacting your classroom, I know you bring other classrooms out to see the same presentation. And so you really impact a lot of students with just that simple program. We also have field trips that I could go on listing forever. I mean, Riley's, I joke with that. We do send a lot there, but we have most of the museums, the Holocaust Museum, the Museum of Art in LA, as well as Natural History Museum, and some very small museums that most of you don't know about. When we read the grant, we go, that's a museum, and look it up. Lo and behold, it is, but it's about local history, and that's important as well. And so again, we're just incredibly excited about the grants that you've written, your creativity that you've had, and the impact that you have on the students. And again, give yourself a hand for all the work that you do and just being creative. So give your hands up. And again, I'd like to thank, and I'd like us to thank, the Webster Foundation for their support, as well as the Amundsen Foundation. And I know many people have said it already, but the uniqueness that the university administration sees in supporting a program like this. And you don't find that in many universities, that they're outreach-minded. And APU, when I was a student here, I saw that, and as well as an employee now, seeing that the outreach that they have for the community is one of our cornerstones that we have, and the support we have for education. Having been a product of the School of Education, and going out and teaching, and then coming back and teaching in the School of Education for a number of years with credential students, I see the importance that we have, we see in you, the teacher, and in a community with the students that you touch. And so as we teach teachers to teach, we touch a lot of lives in the community. And I'm reminded of that by 2 ways. One is with my son, who's swimming, and we went to one of his practices, and I got talking to a lady next door, and she asked, "What do you do?" And I said, "Well, I teach at APU, and I used to teach in middle school." And she goes, "Oh, where did you teach middle school?" I said, "Oh, Baldwin Park." She goes, "Really? Where did you teach?" And I go, "Well, I taught at Jones Junior High School, and I taught 7th grade history forever." And she goes, "My sister-in-law had you." I won't tell you how old she is. But, she said she still talks about you 20 years later. Emotional moment. I told you drama's in my household, so it's just, it's a lack of sleep. But last year at History Day, I was working with helping some students find their way, and this mother came up to me and she goes, "Are you Mr. Landers?" And I can always tell where they knew me from by how they addressed me. If it's Coach, it was when I was teaching at West Covina Christian School. Shout out to West Covina Christian School, my first school that's here and represented. Or Mr. Landers, it was in Baldwin Park. And so I knew, okay, she knows me from, and I thought, okay, so I had her child. And she goes, "Do you remember me? I was in your 7th grade history class." And I go, "Oh," and I go, "Was it my first year teaching or?" Before I went into administration, so it's on the back end, so it didn't make me feel too bad. But she goes, "I remember you making us do History Day, and I hated it when we were having to research the project. But after the project, I enjoyed it. I learned so much. So much so that my daughter now is competing in History Day. And so for you touch a lot of lives and you don't realize it. Middle school, you don't get the warm fuzzies that elementary school teachers do. I mean, I liked Christmas when I taught K-12 because I came home with a lot of goodies, to eat. Especially when I had student parents that made baklava. That was a great year. Got to junior high, it was like the wasteland. You didn't get all those warm fuzzies. And so, you don't know the impact that you make on students, but having students come back and tell you that they remember what you taught them and that their student or their own child is doing something that you taught their parent, just remember that the impact that you have goes a long way for the students that you teach. And so, again, thank you for applying for the grant. Am I missing anything? I'm looking over at my boss over here, Angie, so we're good? All right. I'll bring this to a close, and again, thank you again for applying. Use this time to talk to our grant sponsor, to my bosses. It's always good for them to hear good things that our program does. And then just talk to each other and really network and find out what you do and what you can do to impact more students. So again, thank you for applying and congratulations. Now, the important thing, really what you're waiting for is, how do I get my check? So, if you've done this before, behind us is a screen, and it's not like the Great Oz. We're not, going to do all the smoke and mirrors. But if you go around the back, there are tables with alphabetical letters on, so hopefully you know your alphabet letters for your last name. Line up there, and then they'll give you your packet with your check and all the information about the grant. And I look forward to reading all of your reports that come in this summer that tell us what you've done with your students and all of that. And again, look, we do have a video. Oh, we're not done yet. I'm getting ahead of the game, so I'm off script, so that's a bad thing. But we'll take a minute to show you what you've done this year with the various grants all over LA County. I'd like to thank our student worker who actually put the slides of all your videos together. That's one of the enjoying things in the summer is to be able to take a look at all the pictures you guys send in and see. And it reminds me of the times when I was in the classroom doing things like that. And it doesn't make me miss it that much to go back, but because all the other things you get to deal with as well. But again, thank you for coming today, and we enjoy reading all your reports, and we'll see you soon. So I'll let you go in the back.